You're at the gym, waiting by the lockers. The guy next to you is showing off his new Apple Watch Ultra, talking about the upgrade like it's nothing. Two lockers down, an older man ties a pair of sneakers that look 10 years old and says nothing to anyone. You can clock which one looks richer without even trying. You'd bet money on it. Money you don't actually have if you're honest. Money that's been sitting somewhere quiet, telling you the truth for months while you kept reading everyone else wrong. And you start wondering how many other people you've been misreading the exact same way. One of them sits 2 cubicles down from you. Why millionaires don't look rich. You've started noticing things about Trevor. He's the guy from the parking lot, 2 cubicles down, and once you start paying attention, you can't stop. The lunches he orders through an app instead of packing. The way he says, just got back like it's nothing. Like everyone spends a long weekend in Cabo. The watch he wears has a green face and a crown that catches the light when he types. A Rolex Submariner, though you had to look it up to know that's what it was called. You do the math without meaning to. Lease, watch, the trips. None of it adds up to savings. It adds up to a monthly number you don't want to think about. Then there's Walter. Walter lives 2 floors down from you, and you only really know him from the laundry room, where he shows up on Sunday mornings in the same gray flannel, folding his shirts the exact same way every time. Collar first, sleeves in, fold in half. He drives a Toyota Corolla that's older than some of your coworkers. You've said maybe 40 words to him total, mostly about the dryer that eats quarters. Last month, the building needed someone to handle the roof repair reserve, and nobody wanted the job, so Walter raised his hand. You went to the meeting because free pizza was mentioned in the email, and you watched Walter write a check for the full repair, $41,000, in the same slow, careful handwriting he probably used to sign his kids' report cards 40 years ago. He didn't flinch. He didn't make a joke about it to lighten the moment. He just wrote the number, folded the check exactly once, and slid it across the table. Nobody else in that room reacted like it was strange. You did. You went home and sat with that for a while, because it broke something you'd been carrying around without realizing it. The quiet assumption that money looks like something, that it announces itself, that you'd know it when you saw it, the way you know Trevor has it because of the watch and the lease and the Cabo weekends. Here's the part that's harder to sit with. You're not wrong that money exists on your street, in your building, 2 cubicles down. You're wrong about where. Roughly 1 in every 12 adults in this country is currently sitting on a net worth of $1 million or more. That's not a rare, roped-off category. That's the guy in 4B. That's the man folding his shirts on a Sunday, writing checks nobody blinks at because nobody in the room knows what they just watched. The wealth is there. It's just wearing flannel instead of a green-faced watch. What gets you isn't that Walter has money and you assumed he didn't. It's that you'd built an entire read on people, coworkers, neighbors, strangers in parking lots, based on a signal that turns out to mean almost nothing. The lease, the watch, the trips posted from a balcony somewhere warm. You'd been grading everyone on a curve that has nothing to do with what's actually in their account, and you didn't even choose to grade that way. You just absorbed it, the way you absorb everything, from ads, from feeds, from every image that ever taught you what doing well is supposed to look like. So you start doing something you've never done before. You start doing the math on Trevor's lease. What a new car actually costs you. You don't do the math right away. First, you do the opposite. You drive to the BMW dealership on Route 9 on a Saturday, telling yourself you're just looking, and a salesman named Doug hands you the keys to a black X5, like it's nothing. Like people hand each other $60,000 vehicles all day long, which, in that building, they do. The seats are cold at first and then warm within seconds, some heating element kicking in before you even asked for it. Doug talks about lease terms while you grip the wheel and picture yourself pulling into the office lot next to Trevor. Except now, it's you people are doing math about. You almost let him print the paperwork. Almost. What stops you is a number, Doug says like it's a small detail, tucked between talk of financing and floor mats. $772 a month. That's the going rate this year for financing a new car in America. The average monthly payment has never been higher. You sit with that number in the warm leather seat, and something in your stomach drops the way it does when you check your account before payday and already know what it says. You leave without signing anything. Doug looks disappointed but not surprised, like he's watched 100 people walk out of that exact conversation. That night, you do what you should have done before you ever got in the car. You open your laptop and pull up two numbers side by side. The average new car in America right now costs $49,275. A brand new Toyota Corolla. The same car Walter drives, the one that's been getting him to work since before you had a mortgage to not have, costs $24,320. The gap between those two numbers is almost exactly $25,000. You stare at that figure for a while because it doesn't feel like $25,000. It feels like nothing, like the difference between a good car and a nicer one, a rounding error in a life that already has a car in it either way. But money doesn't care how a number feels. It only cares what you do with it. You open a calculator and run something you've never bothered running before. $25,000 invested instead of driven off a lot, growing at the kind of average return an S&P 500 index fund has actually delivered over long stretches of time. Call it 8% a year, a number conservative enough that it isn't a fantasy. You let it sit for 30 years, roughly the span between where you are now and when you'd actually want to stop working. The number that comes back is over $250,000. You read it twice. Not because you don't believe the math. The math is simple, the kind you could do by hand if you had the patience, but because you're doing a different kind of math in your head at the same time. The math of what that $250,000 would have meant. A down payment on a house you're not sure you'll ever afford otherwise. Years shaved off a retirement that currently exists only as a vague, anxious idea. Room to breathe is what it actually comes down to, and you just watched yourself almost trade that room for heated seats and a badge on the hood. You think about Doug, back at the dealership, printing paperwork for someone else right now. You think about Trevor's lease, and what $772 a month becomes when you let it sit somewhere other than a parking spot. And you think about Walter, who's probably folding laundry right now in the same gray flannel, having never once done this math out loud because he didn't need to. He just never signed the paperwork in the first place. The car was never really the expensive part. The expensive part was what the car quietly took the place of. Credit card interest, nobody talks about. The check engine light finally wins. You're on the highway 2 exits from home when the car starts making a sound like something loose is trying to become something broken. And you pull into the first garage you see, hands still shaking a little from the noise of it. The mechanic's name is Ray, and he doesn't waste time being gentle. Transmission issue, he says, wiping his hands on a rag that's seen better decades. Parts and labor, $1,400. He says it the way you'd tell someone it's supposed to rain later. Just a fact, no weight behind it because to him it's Tuesday. To you, it's your entire checking account and then some. You don't have $1,400 sitting anywhere. You have $340 in checking and a savings account you opened 2 years ago that's never seen more than $600 in it at once. So you do what you've done before, what nearly half the country would do in the same spot. You hand Ray your card. He runs it. It goes through. You breathe out like you'd been holding it since the highway. That relief lasts about as long as the drive home. Here's the thing about that $1,400 sitting on a card at the interest rate most people are currently paying, a little over 22%, is that it doesn't stay $1,400. If you only send the minimum each month the way a lot of people do because the minimum is what fits, that balance takes years to disappear and drags more than $400 in interest along with it before it's gone. Money that buys you nothing. No transmission, no peace of mind, no anything. It just evaporates into the space between what you owe and what you can afford to pay down. You think about how ordinary this is, and that's the part that actually gets you. You're not reckless. You didn't buy a boat. You didn't blow rent on a weekend in Cabo like the pictures Trevor posts every few months. You just had a car that broke, the way cars do, and no cushion underneath you when it happened. The average household carrying a balance right now owes north of $11,000. And that's not $11,000 of vacations and impulse buys. A lot of it is exactly this: a transmission, a dentist appointment nobody budgeted for, Life. Arriving on a Thursday with a bill attached. You call your sister that night, mostly to vent, and she asks if you have an emergency fund. You laugh not because it's funny, but because the honest answer is no, not really. And saying it out loud makes it worse than just thinking it. She doesn't say anything smug back. She just goes quiet for a second. And you can tell she's doing math about her own accounts because more than half the country is currently in the same spot, unable to cover a surprise $1,000 expense without reaching for a card or a favor or a prayer. That's the part that sits with you longest. Not that you got unlucky, not that Ray overcharged you, because he didn't. That repair was fair, even a little below what you'd braced for. What sits with you is how thin the floor actually is underneath an ordinary life. One transmission, one bad month, and suddenly you're not just short on cash, you're short on cash and paying rent on the shortage every month until it's gone. You think about Trevor's lease again, the number you ran the math on. You think about Walter's check, folded once, no hesitation, and you start to understand that the gap between the two of them was never really about how much either man made. It was about what was sitting underneath them the day something broke. You start wondering what Walter would have done in that garage, and it isn't the transmission you're really asking about. How 401k millionaires really get built. You catch Walter on a Saturday morning out by the bike rack that's been wobbling for months, wrench in hand, doing the fix himself instead of putting in a maintenance request like everyone else in the building does. You almost walk past. Instead, you stop and ask if he needs a hand, and somewhere between him tightening a bolt and you holding the rack steady, you just say it. You ask him how he did it. The check, the $41,000, folded once, no hesitation. Walter doesn't look up right away. He finishes the bolt first, the way he seems to finish everything before he'll talk about it. Then, he tells you he's been putting money into his 401k since he was 26, back when the match his company offered felt like free money he almost didn't bother claiming. He never touched it, never borrowed against it for a truck or a kitchen renovation. Just let it sit in an S&P 500 index fund, quarter after quarter, through crashes he doesn't even remember the names of anymore. He's 61 now. He tells you the number in his account like it embarrasses him slightly to say out loud, and it's over $1 million. You do the thing you keep doing lately, which is to go home and check whether what he told you actually holds up. And it does. The average 401k millionaire in America right now is close to Walter's age and has been feeding the same account for about 25 straight years. Nothing dramatic happened in those 25 years. No lucky stock pick, no inheritance, just a percentage of every paycheck redirected before he ever felt it land in his checking account. This year, the most anyone's allowed to put into a 401k is $24,500. And the number of Americans who've crossed $1 million in these accounts alone jumped by more than a quarter in just the last year. You think about your own 401k, the one HR set up automatically when you got hired and you've never once looked at since. You open the app that night, hands a little tense the way they get before you check anything that might disappoint you. And there it is, a number that isn't nothing, but isn't much either. Somewhere in the neighborhood of what most people your age are sitting on, which is a little over $80,000. Respectable. Also, next to Walter's number, almost embarrassing. The gap between his account and yours isn't talent, it isn't luck. It's 20-some years of not touching it. Then, you think about your savings account, the one at the same bank you've had since college, and you check that too, mostly out of morbid curiosity now. It's currently paying you a rate so small it barely qualifies as interest. A fraction of a percent, the kind of number that wouldn't buy you a coffee over the course of a year. You open a new tab and look up a high-yield account at Ally Bank on a whim and find it's currently paying more than 10 times what your bank has been giving you this whole time for doing absolutely nothing different with the money except moving where it sits. You almost laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's so simple it feels like it should be illegal. You've been losing money for years just by leaving it in the wrong place, the same way Trevor's lease has been quietly costing him a future he probably hasn't calculated yet. Walter never talked about any of this. Not once, not to you, not in that meeting where he wrote the check nobody blinked at. And that's when it actually lands. He wasn't hiding it out of secrecy. He just never needed anyone to know. The account did what it was supposed to do, whether or not a single person in this building ever found out it existed, which makes you wonder for the first time what it would even cost you if they did. The social cost of looking wealthy. Trevor invites you out for drinks that Friday. His treat, he says, waving off the bill before you even see it. You've stopped assuming that's generosity. Now you just wonder what it's actually costing him, and it turns out you don't have to wonder long. Halfway through the second round, a guy from accounting named Dale pulls up a stool next to Trevor like he's been waiting for the right moment all week. Dale's smiling too hard. He starts with small talk, the Knicks game, the new coffee machine on the third floor, and then slides into it sideways, the way people do when they've rehearsed the ask in the car. He needs $600, just until payday. He says it low, like it's between the two of them, except you're sitting right there and Trevor doesn't ask you to leave. Trevor doesn't say no. You watch him not say no. Watch him do the math in his head the way you did the math on his lease a few weeks back, except his math is about whether he can afford to say yes and still make his own payment on the X5 this month. He tells Dale he'll Venmo him tomorrow. Dale claps him on the shoulder, says something about Trevor always coming through, and heads back to the bar looking lighter than he did 5 minutes ago. Trevor looks the opposite of lighter. Once Dale's gone, Trevor exhales and says this isn't the first time. Says people at the office have some idea in their heads that he's doing better than he is because of the car, because of the trips, and once people get that idea in their heads, they don't really ask you for money. They just assume you have it, and assuming turns into asking, and asking turns into you being the guy who can't say no without becoming the guy who let everyone down. He laughs when he says it, but it's the kind of laugh that's covering for something closer to exhausted. You think about Walter. Nobody has ever cornered Walter at a bar for $600. Nobody's ever assumed Walter has it, because nothing about Walter suggests he does, even though he has more sitting in an index fund than most of that office combined. The flannel and the 9-year-old Corolla aren't just habits, they're a kind of camouflage, whether Walter ever thought of it that way or not. There's a name for what happened to Trevor, and it's older than you'd guess. An economist named Thorstein Veblen wrote about it back in 1899 in a book about the leisure class, describing spending that exists purely to be seen, not for what it does for you, but for what it signals to everyone watching. He called it conspicuous consumption, and the strange part is how little has changed since he coined it. The car in the parking lot, the watch, the trip photographed from a balcony, all of it works exactly like Veblen said it would. It gets noticed, and getting noticed, it turns out, is not free. You start to see it as a kind of tax nobody warns you about. Not the lease payment, not the insurance, not even the $250,000 you calculated slipping away into the wrong asset. A second tax, paid in favors you can't refuse and friendships that quietly start running on unspoken debt. Every dollar Trevor spends to look like he's ahead ends up costing him something he can't put back. The ability to say no to Dale, to the next Dale, to whoever notices the watch next and does the same math you did. You think about how relieved you felt walking out of that dealership without signing anything. You hadn't thought about it as protection at the time. You'd thought about it as money. Now you're starting to understand it was also this. One less person ever who'd corner you at a bar assuming you had money to spare, which makes you wonder what you're actually protecting when you finally have something worth protecting. What quiet money actually buys you. 6 months later, your transmission's fine, your card is paid off, and there's $1,200 sitting in a high-yield account at Alley that didn't exist the last time Ray had to fix anything on that car. You didn't do anything dramatic to get there. You just moved the savings account, dropped $200 a week that used to disappear into nothing in particular, and left it alone the way Walter left his alone for 25 years. Then, your manager calls you into her office on a Thursday and tells you the team's being restructured. Your role's getting folded into someone else's, effective next month, and there's a severance package if you want it, or you can interview for a different position that pays less and reports to someone you've never liked. 6 months ago, this news would have flattened you. You know that because you remember exactly how it felt watching the check engine light flicker on the highway. The specific kind of panic that comes from not having a floor under you. This isn't that. Your stomach drops for a second, sure, but it doesn't stay dropped. You do a different kind of math in your head, quieter this time, and you realize you can actually afford to take a breath before deciding anything. You're not desperate enough to grab the first bad option in the room. You tell your manager you'll think about it and get back to her Monday. Walking out of the building, you pass the parking lot and Trevor's spot is empty. He got laid off 2 weeks ago. You heard it secondhand. The way you hear most things about him now. Somebody said he's already talking about picking up freelance work to cover the lease because breaking it early costs almost as much as just paying it out. The BMW is still his. The job that was paying for it isn't. You think about that the whole drive home, and it's not smug. Whatever you're feeling, it's closer to recognition. You spent months assuming the gap between you and Trevor was about income, then about willpower, then about some secret system you hadn't been taught. It was never any of that. It was about what happens the day something breaks, a car, a job, a plan, and what's sitting underneath you when it does. You knock on Walter's door that weekend, mostly just to talk, and end up telling him about the restructuring, the severance offer, the account that finally has something real in it. He listens the way he does everything, unhurried, and when you're done, he tells you that's the whole point of the money. Not the number. What the number lets you do. He says he turned down 2 jobs in his 30s that would have paid more. Because he could afford to. Because nothing about his life would have collapsed if he'd said no. Says most people never get to find out what they'd actually choose because they're never in a position to choose anything. You go back to your apartment and open your laptop instead of your phone, which feels like its own small shift. You draft 2 emails. One accepts the interview for Monday. The other, still sitting in drafts, says something close to no thank you. Words you're not sure yet you have the nerve to send. But for the first time, you know you technically could. You close the laptop and sit there for a minute in the quiet. No BMW in the lot outside, no watch on your wrist, nothing about your apartment that would tell anyone walking past what's actually sitting in your accounts now. You think about Walter's flannel, Trevor's lease, the $250,000 you almost drove off a lot in a different life. None of it was ever about the car. It was always about what the car was quietly costing you, or quietly buying you, depending on which one you drove home. You still don't know which email you're going to send. The email you haven't sent yet. You still check your account most nights, not out of fear anymore, just habit. The number's not huge. It doesn't need to be. What it buys you is a Monday morning where you can walk into that interview and mean it if you say no. Nobody will know that from looking at you. Same jacket, same 9-year-old car, same parking spot that used to sit next to a BMW. That's fine. You've stopped needing the lot to say anything about you. Somewhere this week, you'll pass someone's leased SUV, someone's new watch, and for a second the old math will try to come back. The assuming, the comparing. Let it try. You know what's underneath things now, or at least you know to ask. The draft is still sitting there, unsent. You haven't decided. But you could.